Welcome to the Freedom CEO podcast. It's about becoming the chief decision maker over your life in order to step into a life of freedom. From business, health, wealth, charity, and giving back to just doing life on your own terms. I am your host, Shay Invidiata. I am an award-winning activist, change maker, and a multi-facet impact entrepreneur with over a decade of experience in business, philanthropy, and health and wellness. In this space, I'm going to be bringing you insights, not just from me, but from incredible thought leaders around the globe to help you start making decisions towards living a life of freedom so you can live a life you love. Are you ready, guys? Because we are going all in. His career as a professional skier ended with breaking his neck in 2012. On the path of recovery, James Bravelove discovered a passion for entrepreneurship, spiritual growth, conscious relationships, and men's work. Today, James is the founder of Alpha Rising Men's Work and is a men's relationship coach and breathwork facilitator. James is on a mission to challenge men to lead, love, and play wholeheartedly and create more fulfillment in their lives.
I'm so excited today. I have James Bravelove, who is on the Freedom CEO podcast. And we are going to be talking a lot about transformation, transitions in life. And I'm really going to go into a lot of the challenging the alpha and like man today. It's not all the time that I get a man on the show. So I'm really excited to have you here, James. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much. My pleasure. I'm happy to be here.
So you're in Costa Rica. I'm in Toronto right now. We met in Costa Rica. And when we met, I knew you with a different name. And
Indeed.
I'm also learning about kind of your previous life passions and what you used to do in life. And it's really interesting because when you look at who you are, I really feel like you're like actually living out your purpose, which is all about the transformation, right? And the work you're doing right now with Alpha Rising with men. So before we get into that, because that's the good stuff for sure, I'd love for you to just share with me, who were you in a past life? Skiing was in your past. So here you were pretty darn good at it. So let's start there in your journey.
Yeah. So the whole past life of Dave Wheel. David James Wheel is my full legal name still. So James Bravelove, James is my middle name. Bravelove is more of what I'm creating, what I'm stepping into now. And that all came from a Vision Quest experience that I went on recently. So I can dig more into that. But the past, like you said, skiing was a huge part of my life for my whole childhood and all through my 20s. I moved from Ontario. I grew up near Blue Mountain, a couple hours away from where you are now, and moved to Whistler, BC when I was 18 to chase dreams of becoming a professional skier. And I competed, I filmed, I had a bunch of sponsors, and I coached as well in skiing. I coached, I started in park, moved more into big mountain, and then started coaching in the big mountain space as well. Taking, youth, teaching them how to do flips and jump off big cliffs and ski big gnarly lines and stuff. And to the point of one of my guys actually won the world championships for under 18. So it was very high level and so much fun. Huge chapter of my life. Skiing still holds such a special place in my heart. And that all changed when I broke my neck in the fall of 2012. So as you can imagine, having a whole life built around sport and then going through something like that, it was a real wrench thrown into the works, but also a very, beautiful synchronistic thing that happened as well. It opened me up to so much more around spirituality, around entrepreneurship, around health, around just mindset and the power of our mind, the way we think about meditation. Like, it opened me to so many of these avenues that have since become what my whole life is about, really, is helping other people learn more about this stuff and improve their lives. Really, that's the core of what we do in men's work. So that's the short version. So happy to poke in more wherever you want. But
yeah, I mean, that's obviously even just the type of accident you had was not little, right? Like you hear of other like sports injuries where you might like blow out your knee, you could break an arm.
Yeah.
You know, you've done that too. Yeah.
Yeah, I've had many of those small injuries. Probably spent on average about a month a year through my entire 20s on the couch due to injury. Like
Wow.
multiple torn ligaments in both ankles, both knees, both shoulders. Broke my foot super bad, and then breaking the neck was like the big one on top of that whole pile. So I knew a lot about a lot of the mental side of that and recovery and all that before, but the neck really, it shook me up to a much deeper level, as well as a few pretty serious concussions in the mix too. So there was a lot there, and that was just like the final straw, so to speak, of like, you need to start doing something more long term with your life, and use all these things that you're passionate about, and share more of this gift. Even though I love sharing the gift of my passion for skiing and teaching people how to do that, it was also just I'm here for more than that.
So I mean, it's crazy even when you think of, you've had many different injuries over the years. This one was the final straw that was the gateway that brought you into a new path or onto a new path. How was that transition? Because I can only imagine there's this element of like losing yourself in order to find yourself or reinvent yourself, because this is an identity that you've known for most of your life. And
100%.
and now
I
it's
was
like
a skier. Like that was who I kind of considered myself to be, not just the fact that that's something I do. Like my entire life was built around that. So
yeah,
it was a big one. How did the transition look? It was slow. It was painful at first, but I started to sink in. Actually, cannabis played a big role in that, in the healing and recovery. Kind of, it helped me to basically get over this like FML like type of mentality, and actually just accept where I am, and then okay, so from here now where am I going? Instead of just being resentful, being bitter, being like depressed, and going down that dark hole of letting your mind just run away on you. I started to look at where I wanted to go next, and I was able to make that switch and start learning, start digging into more podcasts and audiobooks, and just I was laid out on my back for weeks just without able to do anything. And when I made that switch, I started at least using my mind, at least flexing, learning kind of things as I could. That was where I got more into Reiki as well, and meditation, and just started to learn more about the power of the mind in healing the body as well as nutrition. And just I started to get I developed a passion for learning as much as I could about the human system, and how it functions and how it can function better, and how much control we have over our situation with our minds, and just kind of started wandering down the rabbit hole basically.
So as you're on this like quest of learning about the body, the mind, meditation, all of the things you're doing in order to heal, did you have an idea around what you wanted to do next? Did you have
there was
what you were wanting to do?
There was seeds. I had started to dip my toes into the personal development space before that happened, and that was kind of like okay, it's time to actually do this for real now. And so like the seeds have been planted. I'd heard about coaching at that point, but that was where it was really like, it's time to go and just go, like start pivoting more into that space, and entrepreneurship, and creating more freedom for myself, because the world I was in up till that point was like, I love skiing, I love coaching. I was kind of at that cusp of, I was almost 30 at that point. I had some sponsors, but I wasn't like going to be like being a full on pro and getting paid to compete and film. Just didn't really seem like I wasn't quite on that trajectory, partly because of all the other injuries. And just, it was like also just seeing like, do I want to just work jobs and do this? It was like, it wasn't enough of a passion and a motivator to sustain me and keep me moving that direction, especially with the broken neck. It's like, this could happen again next year and it could be even worse. The concussions were a huge piece of that as well, because bones heal, but concussions keep getting worse and worse every time. So there was a few things that kind of added up to like, it's time to start thinking of something different. And a big part of that transition was also moving to a different place, because when you're in a place like Whistler, it's like all of my friends, all of my network was all surrounded with skiing. So I moved to Vancouver and just started getting more into the world of entrepreneurship and, building more connection, building more relationships in this space of people that are up to cool stuff and creating companies and creating impact in the world, and just started surrounding myself with more people to kind of start moving in that direction.
So let me ask you, because, I listen to you and you make it sound very easy to just transition, pick up, move from a place where you had community, you knew people, moving to a place where you knew less people. I'm sure you still knew people in Vancouver, but it's less. And then you're talking about getting into entrepreneurship as if it's like getting a new job, and like you have a consistent amount of money that's coming in, and things are taken care of.
It was a hustle for many years.
Right? Yeah. So let's talk about that, because I think there's a lot of courage that goes into making a really big leap like this. It's really a 180. You're not only just reinventing yourself and this new identity that you're giving birth to. Actually, sorry, Sue, I'm going to take that out. Sorry, I'm talking to my editor. I don't want to say giving birth to with this whole woke bullshit movement. I don't want to use the word like a man's giving birth to. So let me let me go back on that. So there's a lot that is happening for you right now in that moment where you are bringing this whole new essence of yourself that is coming to life that was not there before. And what were some of those challenges that would, what was the hard in that? Because that's not easy to do.
No, it wasn't.
Yeah.
That you touched on the piece of, just the courage that it would take to do something like that, to face these challenges and things like that. And that was a piece that I developed in skiing, I feel, is the ability to do hard things, and to, some of the steps required, some of the mindsets required to be able to take risks and take chances, and making that transition, making that move was definitely a big part of that. I feel there was a piece of it that in some ways I was ready for it before that happened as well. Like, I was already starting to go on this personal development path. I was already craving, people that were kind of on that same page. And a lot of my friends and my community, I had a community in Whistler, but it was also one that I was feeling like I was starting to outgrow in a way, not in an egotistical way, but like craving people that were just thinking on a different level, that were up to different things in life. A lot of my friends and community, where I worked bartending and in restaurants primarily outside of the ski stuff. So a lot of people were just, getting drunk regularly and waiting for the next paycheck, waiting for the next pow day, and without a lot of long-term vision, without a lot of focus on impact and purpose and, creating things. And I'd stopped drinking a year before I moved away from all that. And it was all kind of compounded into I was ready to start fresh, and I was ready to attract a new tribe as well, and to build new community. And so it wasn't just that, it was that was kind of just the piece that really set it all off. And it definitely wasn't easy, but I was excited to go and build a new community. I was excited to go and surround myself with people that were up to things that I wanted to do in the world, that I surround myself with more, like I said, more entrepreneurs, more people that were into meditation, spirituality, yoga, all these things that I was just starting to get a taste of when I lived in Whistler.
And so, sorry, go ahead.
That was it. So I just dove into it. I've always been quite good at making friends, so I wasn't too worried about that part. Just connect with people and start going to events and start putting yourself in situations. I joined Toastmasters. I joined the Man Talks community was a big piece of me moving down there as well. There was they were like a speaker series of events, like men just sharing their stories, getting vulnerable. And again, it was a hub for a lot of guys that were on this page, and women as well. It was open, but it was just going and hanging out where cool people were that I wanted to meet, and getting contacts and making friends and furthering relationships. So,
and what were you doing to make money at this point?
I actually tried my hand for a little bit at some network marketing when I first moved down, which did not go well. Again, I was great at building relationships, but not very good at sales back then. And that was an important part. And it was funny. There's even some things around like, oh, if I just do that, then I'll be able to coach all these people,
Right.
but not have to like go in charge to be a coach. Like I had a lot of kind of inner work to do around valuing myself, valuing what I have to offer, and just my own just self-worth in general. There was a
Right.
lot of things that I hadn't yet delved into at that point in my journey. I just started to learn more about like, oh, I can create things that I want. I can, I can dream, I can goal set, I can, do all these things. I was still very much at the beginning of that journey. It wasn't until getting into men's work where I started to get more into that like depth work. So
Okay. And so how does the coaching piece come into play? Like at what point did you say, I want to get into coaching, and specifically for men? That's like your area of expertise right now, right?
Yep, you got it. The coaching piece started after going through Landmark. I went through some of Landmark Education's programs, and in one of them, the Self-Expression Leadership Program, you're assigned a coach within the program, but they're all just people that have been through the program as well. But my person that I worked with within that was also a life coach outside of that. So that was when I first heard about coaching as a thing.
Right.
And I decided to pursue that afterwards because after coaching skiing for so long, I knew I loved working with people. And that was just like, oh, there's actually a job that I could go and do, a profession I could take on that's using all this stuff that I've developed and learned about and helping people with it. And so that was where the seed first planted. Where I got into men's work was a few years after that, when I started working with the Samurai Brotherhood, which is now the Arca Brotherhood. They rebranded as well. And that was I'm still involved with them. I still lead a group with them just to stay connected with the community and everything, even though I have all my other stuff that I work on for my own brand. And that just took me down the rabbit hole of learning about the father wound and learning about anger and emotional intelligence much more deeply, and learning to express all these things, learning to like dig down into the well of my suppressed crap that hadn't been looked at and just getting to know myself at a much deeper level, getting to work on some of these core beliefs around like I didn't really trust men a whole lot. I didn't really believe in myself a whole lot. My biological father left before I was born, and before that I didn't really build a very good relationship with my stepdad, who came in just because I was like the "you're not my dad" kid, and I had a lot of anger and resentment and a deep mistrust of the masculine that I wasn't even really aware of until I started to get into men's work and started to look at this and started to have a space to really dig into that and work through some of these things I had with other men. Actually, instead of just conceptually, or like the whole coaching space primarily was female dominated. And I was in my coach training, I was like, I think I was one of two guys in a whole room full of 40 to 50-year-old women primarily. So it was in that getting into doing this work with other men where I started to just learn about all these places and pieces of myself that hadn't been healed. And through that work, that was where I grew tremendously through kind of adding that piece into my own development, and it just really sparked a desire to dig into that myself more professionally. So that's kind of where that started.
So like, the word or the term men's work to you, I'm sure, is very obvious, but to many people that just sounds like a kitschy phrase and may not understand like the magnitude of what it actually is. So I'd love for you to unpack that. Like, what are you doing when you say men's work? What is that?
Yeah, no, great question. The core of most, it means lots of different things. There's a lot of different people holding men's groups, and everyone that leads tends to have, their own flavor, their own style, their own things they bring in. The core of most men's groups, though, is actually just having a space for guys to open up and talk about the things that are going on in their lives, and to be vulnerable. Like, it's a space where they're invited to take off their armor a little bit and actually talk about the things that are going on in their lives. Because if you think about traditional places where men gather, it's like at the bar, in the locker room, it's like in these areas at the job site, it's like it's in these areas where it's not a place where guys will come in and say like, hey guys, you know what, like I'm really struggling in my relationship, and or like, like actually open up. It's kind of beer, babes, and blood sports are the typical things that guys talk about in business, and all these kind of surface level, more in some ways ego driven things where it's just talking about the stuff outside, the things that you are willing to show the world. Whereas when you come into a circle, it's a space to talk about more of the inner work, more of your relationship stuff, and like I said, to talk about your relationships with your parents, with your relationship history in general. It's a space to look at some of your patterns that you have, to start understanding yourself and your emotions at a deeper level. That's inherently the core of most men's groups, combined with usually a strong layer of accountability as well, because a lot of guys just aren't great at being consistent and moving forward and keeping their word on things. So and not all by any stretch. There's a lot of guys that are great at that, but there's also a lot of guys that aren't. And
I would second that.
You've experienced this, I think.
Yeah, I have, once or twice.
And to kind of plant a seed of another piece we'll talk about in a minute, I'm sure, is there's a lot of men that haven't been initiated into actually being a mature man. There's a lot of guys that are kind of walking around living in this like boy energy kind of state, where they're just mostly concerned about getting for them, looking as good as they can, and they don't care as much if they have to lie a little bit, or if someone else is, if they're like getting in exchange for someone else losing type of, it's like a lot of this more self-focused type of way of being. And stepping into being a more mature man is, again, developing more spiritually, connecting more with your heart, showing up, being more of service, and being in integrity, having, it's like all this, it's a whole dance of just becoming a more full mature man, like stepping into what's known as like the king archetype in kind of your growth journey. So there's a lot of stuff around that, but that's kind of the core. It's a space to support each other in growing and becoming a better version of yourself, really. And a key piece of this is that, getting into kind of the masculine feminine dynamics a little bit. Masculine is inherently driven to grow through challenge. So I get messages from a lot of women of like, how do I get my man to get into this work? And it's like, unfortunately, you're probably not going to be able to, because most men don't respond well to like being coached or being, pushed by their partner. But if they've got a friend who challenges them more directly, you're like, bro, you need to step up, or like, what are you fucking doing with your life? Like kind of having more of these guys can relate to other guys in a way that's more still coming from love, but in this element of like challenging them to step up and to push themselves more. And it's a natural piece where most men are quite competitive, and usually that's directed at sports, at business, at all these other things. But then when we can use that competitiveness to push ourselves to become better versions of ourselves, it can do a lot of good.
Yeah, totally. I think like even as you're talking about this role and men needing that safe space, there's a lot that's happening, obviously, right now in our world where, and it has been for a while, even before, like, I'm going to say 2020, which seems to be the benchmark or the pivot mark for most of these like drastic changes like we're seeing. But even prior to 2020, what it means to be a man and actually having men really step into their masculine, they can still acknowledge and acknowledge the feminine side of them. We all have it, right? Like, and it doesn't mean you're one way or another having masculine energy versus feminine energy. I am constantly working on bringing in the feminine into my life and letting her back in. But inherently for me, for a very long time, I've been more in my masculine, and that doesn't mean anything from a gender standpoint. It's just allowing those energies and those roles, those characteristics that that they're just different. So when I think of part of the dilution of what it is to be a man has emasculated a lot of men. And then there's this internal struggle and not having a place to go to actually voice that, because not wanting to speak that to your partner or even to other men in general. Like there's a lot of men today that are very intimidated by being with a female who is making more money than them, who doesn't need them, right? Like that is one thing, like archaic times, caveman times, like that is in the DNA, that the man is to protect and provide. And so if you don't need man, that is very emasculating in a lot of ways. And
It
I'd
can
love
be if it's seen that way.
Yeah.
You
Well,
know, it doesn't necessarily have to be, but
it doesn't have to be. You're right.
That's a piece of, I feel, the struggle for a lot of women that I see, you know, like yourself, that are very strong and have accomplished a lot and have made a lot of money, is sometimes there can be a tendency of like drawing in a man who is more on the feminine side. Whereas like for you to be able to relax into your feminine more fully, you need a man who's that much even stronger and more masculine, right? Like you need that polarity to really allow you to soften and allow you to just flow more. And the more you rise, the fewer men there are to choose from that are able to bring you into that space, right? So it would be a challenge, I'd imagine.
Yeah, it's not necessarily a fun one. I'll tell you that. And I don't know what episode number I am on yours, but we do talk about that briefly. So we're not going to unpack that too much here today, but you can go check out James Bravelove on his podcast and look for our episode together on that. But I think these breakdowns, if you will, of what's happening supports more of the reason why men need to be in these type of groups, to have this type of support. Because as that's breaking down and feeling emasculated, as if you're going to be saying to your partner in that vulnerability how you're feeling, that's very hard for it's hard for men and anybody, not just a man, just like people in general, if you're having to be that vulnerable. But that can have that reverse effect. Whereas like when you're in this safe container with men that are there to support no matter what is going on in your life, and is saying, hey, here's my shit, my insecurities, my problems, my vulnerabilities, it really allows for the masculine to come back like from that, because you have other men that then step up to support, to help. Like I mean, you know this better than I do. You're in this working with the men.
Yeah, it's a big one, because again, just back to that initial piece we talked about, where most men don't have a space to be vulnerable or to talk about anything emotional, or not most maybe, but a lot. There can often become this dynamic where for a lot of men, their woman is their space to be vulnerable, is their space to be emotional. And when that is repeated over and over again, like you can create a bit of a dynamic where the woman can shift into more of like a motherly energy instead of being the lover. And not that you should never be vulnerable with your woman, but if she's your only source of emotional support, then you're just going to create this weird dynamic where she has to mother you, and she doesn't see you as this powerful king. She sees you as this boy that needs to get mothered. And that's where having a men's group can be really powerful, because you have a space to receive support. Like men are actually really good at supporting, at giving, at, you know, just being that, providing that energy. And so when we do that for each other, we get to be a lot stronger in our families, in our relationships, for our kids. Like we have a whole crew of guys to hold us up, so that we have that much more energy and strength to pour into our relationships and our families and the rest. And it's and again, not that you shouldn't be vulnerable. Like it's important to be vulnerable with your partner as well, obviously, but you know, you don't have to go and break down all the time with her for her to see your heart. You know, if you've got a space to do that, then it's just every so often that can happen. But, you know, she can then see you as more of that pillar for the family, that just man that's like, you know, strong and confident and coming from love more and more of the time. So.
No, I agree. And this is also too why it's like important to be like, we kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier about just like, what is men's work? I want to say like, this is why doing the work whether, you're a man or as a woman, is just so important. This personal development piece of really, there's so many layers, right? Like, we're very complex beings. We have all experienced some type of heartache and probably trauma in our life, and that
Mhm.
like that gets suppressed. And when that's not addressed, they materialize sometimes physically, absolutely energetically as well, but then it manifests also in your relationships. And that can be a major struggle between two partners when you're not acknowledging, not addressing what's actually going on inside, and even the root of why that's inside as well. And so in a space like what you have created and the work that you're doing, you're really able to not just speak and share of what's going on right now, but you start to go further, right? You go deeper into past the surface conversations and starting to get to the root of, like, well, when did that first happen? And how do we find that? Which there's many different ways to do that, and techniques of how we do that. But this is why being in the work in general is so important, and it's ongoing. For me, it's forever. It's like, I'm never going to be done, right?
100%. Yeah, there's this term or concept called like being teachable or being coachable, which essentially the core of that is just being willing to admit that you got things to learn, and being
Totally.
willing to take things on, even if not everything fits or not everything is for you. Like, having the willingness to try on different ways of being, different ways of showing up. And I've heard it said that the people that are the most successful in life are the ones that are the most teachable, the ones that are the most coachable, because it's like, as soon as you stop being teachable, as soon as you're like, nah, I've got it all figured out, then you've set your bar, you set your cap to your growth. Essentially, you're not going to grow beyond that if you believe that you don't have anything else to learn.
Yeah.
And if you're not, like, if you still got room to grow, you still got things to learn. So
Totally.
it's but it takes a humbleness to have that mindset, and to, again, there's a lot of people out there that are not willing to even look at that stuff, or even like admit that they might not have everything figured out, which sounds ridiculous to me at this point, because I've been in this world for so long. But for a lot of people, that's like the hardest part, is just admitting that, like, yeah, I could use some support.
Totally. Well, I mean, to further kind of that thought, I always say that the people that say they don't need it are the ones who need it the most. Always. Like, and you said it in a different way around, like, learning and teaching. And, I mentioned earlier, like, I'm never done the work. Like, I'm always evolving. I'm a lifelong student. I want to be learning more. And there's always something that you can do to optimize your health, your education, business strategies. Like, you can always do something better, always, and so that's a lifelong journey. So for when I hear people saying, oh, I don't need that, I don't need to do that, I'm like, you're the person who needs to do it the most. And I think there's a lot of, again, it's being afraid of being vulnerable, and thinking that which, if I expose what was going on, is going to separate me from my person, my partner, my community, my family, my friends, whatnot. And yet, in whatever that situation is, whatever that struggle is, when you're vulnerable with it, very often that which we think separates us is actually what brings us together stronger. I can't think of any time where somebody's come to me being like, I'm really struggling with this, or I'm going through this breakup, what's going on behind closed doors. And you're like, oh gosh, like, that's horrible. And you just walk away. No, like, right. Like, that normally, that typically doesn't happen. I mean, if you have shitty people in your circle, that could very well happen. But I can guarantee you that they are not, even if that person walked away, they're able to relate to you. They can still relate to you on some level of what they've gone through in their personal life that maybe people don't know. And so it's like, when we can start seeing the evolvement of personal development as not a sign of weakness, of something that you're embarrassed to be doing, but something that is exciting and you can evolve, and it's actually empowering. It's a completely different perspective shift. And I was speaking with somebody last week about this, literally going, I don't need to do that. And I was saying about going for like health, like ozone treatments, which like I do those in Costa Rica, and like the ionic foot baths, and just, I love on a weekly doing something that's going to better like my health. And they were saying to me, like, I don't need to be doing that. What if I'm supposed to be going to this and to that? Like, and the way that they were saying it, I'm like, are you embarrassed? Because let me tell you, I'm the first one. I posted all over the place. Like, I'm doing all kinds of stuff. And so I think if we shift the perspective of seeing that this self-care is not self-weakness, but it's actually self-empowerment, that's a game changer mentally. And you get excited about doing something new, about learning something, about being vulnerable and saying, hey, have you experienced this in your life? Because this is what I'm going through. And you're a safe person for me. Obviously, what I'm saying right now doesn't mean you go to like anybody that you meet or any person that's in your life, but you have your people, and you have that, that trust circle that you can go and confide in and say, look, this is what I'm going through. And you're probably going to get a very compassionate response for the most part.
And you'll figure out the people that aren't on that path with you that are wanting you to succeed, because there will be people, especially depending on what your circle looks like, there will be people that judge you and push you away for getting into this stuff. But those are some of the relationships that tend to just fall away as you keep growing. And that's part of the journey. It's like, as you grow, you're going to bring in new friends. You're going to lose friends at times. Like, and because not everyone has like an unconditional love and desire for you to be the best version of yourself. Some people, if they're more in fear and they see you starting to grow, they like start judging you because you're like, what are you doing? Like, why do you think you can go and create whatever you want in your life, And you learn a lot about your friends in those moments as well. So one piece just around what you're talking about that I wanted to kept popping into mind was a good friend of mine and mentor, Connor Beaton from Man Talks. When I had him on the show, he shared that like most men, for a big chunk of their life, live their life in pursuit of resources, because having a lot of resources is a very attractive quality as a man. Most men aren't as concerned with being like physically beautiful because it's not as attractive to women as it is to have resources. And we're in this shift now where consciousness is being seen as a resource. So now that it's actually like, oh yeah, like most women these days, especially if they're into this work, they want a man who understands his emotions and can communicate effectively and not just run away from shit and has a high level of consciousness. And so now that that's starting to be seen as a resource that can help them attract women, there's more and more men that are being drawn into doing this work. So it's just kind of a natural evolution. But like you're saying, for a long time, it wasn't seen that way. It was like, you're going to a therapist, like, what the fuck's wrong with you?
Totally.
And so it's just, we're seeing starting to see, it's still very small in the grand scheme of things. It's easy to think it's bigger when you hang out with people that are all on this page, but you go into like any random town in the state somewhere and you'll see, or Canada even, and there's a lot of people that are still like, this shit's crazy. But it's growing, it's gaining popularity, and there's more and more people that are starting to open up and wake up to looking at the world this way and just doing this work. So.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, part of the consciousness is also you have the ability, you have the power to reframe whatever's not serving you. So when I hear the word therapist, because you just brought this up, and I've said this in the past, a therapist is a very helpful tool, but it can also mean you have a problem, you're going through something really hard, there's trauma, and that might be true. And for some people, then they don't want to be telling people they're going and seeing a therapist. And I'm like, well, what if you reframe that and you say you're speaking to your life coach? Because that's very empowering. And for me, there should be zero shame in that. You look at top performers in the world, whether an athlete like yourself, like you had a coach, you did not become a professional skier and get to the top the way that you did on your own. No, you have a coach, you have a trainer, you have a nutritionist coach, you have all different kinds of coaches in the athletic world because they're experts in those areas, right? And so I think about that when people are saying, I don't want to go speak to a therapist. It's like, well, then go speak to a life coach. Go get yourself a life coach, and reframing that. But it's allowing other people who are experts in other areas of your life to be able to add value and speak into your life,
100%.
Yeah.
Help you perform your best. Athletes have coaches because they want to perform their best. And that's why wouldn't you want to perform your best at life and at business and in your relationships as well? It's and just having that extra set of eyes, it's you can so often. That's the biggest piece of what I do is just help them point out blind spots that people can't see. They'll tell me about what's going on. I'm like, cool. Well, have you thought about this thing that you're doing, or like this way of looking at your situation? They're like, wow, no. Like, damn, you're right. And it's that's the piece that comes. You only get to see your existence through your view. You're not looking at yourself from outside perspective. So it's valuable to have that kind of insight.
Yeah. Okay, so James, before we kind of wrap up, I really want to chat about your name shift. You've got this, you have lived, I don't want to say different lives, but you have migrated through life, and it's been a really cool journey. And now you are changing your name for a reason. And let's unpack that a little bit. What's the story behind that?
Yeah, happy to share. There's been a lot of transitions in my life, as you mentioned. And this current one that I'm going through is a lot of my transitions have been very external. Have been like, new jobs, new businesses, new places that I'm living, no new whole everything in the external world. This one was more of an internal transition that I've gone through. I think if we didn't mention it, it came out of this rite of passage that I went through not that long ago with a group called the Rising Man Movement. And it's similar to a Native American style vision quest, but not. They're not directly, so they've trained in that lineage, but not directly associated with them. So they call it a vision fast, where essentially we went out into the woods for 8 days as a group, and then broke off, and we found our own place in the forest to spend 4 days and 4 nights completely alone with just ourselves and our journal and water, no food, no tent, just sleeping under the stars and just
in the forest.
Exactly.
With bugs and snakes,
nature and coyotes and all sorts of stuff. And it was during that time that this had been like part of that whole process was, the reason why it was a thing, as I mentioned, a lot of guys haven't been initiated into being a man. And that's what this whole journey was really about, was all of us being in it, even though I'm almost 40, like being initiated into being a man truly in my life and looking at my past, looking at my journey that I've been through, talking to my mom about the story around my birth, like really going even deeper than I already have, because I've done a lot of this stuff already. And really looking at some of the overarching patterns, looking at the things that have been holding me back, looking at just how I'm showing up in the world and how I want to be showing up in the world moving forward and on the other side of this. And so the name change was something that I'd thought about for a while. It's something that me and my wife had been talking about. As I mentioned, James was my middle name before, so that wasn't a huge shift. It was already there. Bravelove was our wedding hashtag. Actually, that's where first it was created, because my wife's name is Brooke, and Brooke plus Dave equals brave. And Bravelove was it got created around our wedding of like, this is what we're all about, because we actually, it's a whole other tangent, but we started dating in a conscious relationship training program. So this whole idea of doing this work together, being in a conscious relationship and actually, dealing with all the things instead of just ignoring them and pretending they're not there, has been a theme throughout our whole relationship. Helped us go very deep very quickly.
Yeah.
But it had been something we talked about because my legal last name is my mother's maiden name, and my biological father left before I was born, and he was adopted. So I have zero connection to my paternal lineage, like how a name is typically passed down. So I didn't really have any huge desire for Brooke to take that on. She didn't either. And she's also an entrepreneur and has her own, like, businesses and stuff. So her name was kind of connected to that. And we talked about the idea of like, what if we just created our own last name together at some point down the road and like really step into, being a team, being a unit. And like, if that were like, what do we want to create?
Right.
And Bravelove is what we're all about creating. That's kind of like my work has evolved in that direction where men's work is such a broad topic, but relationships are a really key area that I love working in, that I tend to attract a lot of guys to work on and work with around. And we've started dabbling in doing some couples work as well. And we want to move more in that direction as we move into the future of doing more work together under this Bravelove banner. So
Cool.
That's where that came from. And it just felt like the right time when I was out there. I went through a lot of stuff around just letting who I was, like this kind of boy self, this previous version of myself, letting it really die in the woods, and stepping forward into this new chapter, into this new phase of my life as this new version. And it's just like, well, if I'm going to change my name, what better time than like as I'm, it really for me embodies everything that I'm claiming and stepping into. Part of that, as well as just a fun little exercise that any of your audience can take on as well, is they had us create what they call the power statement, which is like a one sentence, which is who you are, what you're all about, and what you're creating in the world. And for me, after a lot of thought and reflection, that came out as I am a bold, abundant, visionary, and committed father who's here to challenge men to lead, love, and play wholeheartedly. And so that statement is who James Bravelove is. And that's what I'm growing into. And that's like, it's a combination of who I am now and who I'm moving towards. Like, I'm not a father yet. We don't have kids, but
I was literally going to ask you that. I'm like, he said father. I'm like, are you announcing that you guys are pregnant on my show?
No, sadly not. But that was a part of what hit me while I was out there as well. Just how much I've known for a long time that was a huge part of my purpose, was to become a father. And to, I've spent a lot of time, as I shared, working with kids over the years. And so has my wife through her, like, she teaches dance and yoga and mental health stuff. And so she's worked with kids throughout her life as well. And we've always known that, but it's just, we'd forgotten that somehow. In the shuffle of the last couple of years of transitioning down to Costa Rica and buying a house down here and renovating and like building new businesses and new lives, like this just really helped me come home to that. And so that's why it's in there.
So
and
beautiful.
It's like that statement has a way of like pulling you forward into, that's the idea of like, what are you stepping into? So yeah, that was so the cap on that is the last night of my fast while I was out there, they had invited us to take on this challenge of like a kind of self-guided ceremony of, they called that a vigil night of, I built this little power circle for myself where I kind of did a lot of my meditations and stuff while I was out there. And before we came back to camp on the Friday morning. We went out on Monday, and so the Thursday night, right before we came back to camp, there was an invitation to pack up your camp Thursday at sunset and then step into your power circle on the Thursday night and not leave your power circle until the light came in the morning, and not sleep, like spend the entire night awake, just with yourself, with the stars, with God, and with this vision that you're creating for yourself, with this new version of yourself that you're calling in. And like, are you willing to be vigilant enough to spend the night? And it's like a 4-foot diameter circle. Like, you can't lie down, you can't rest, it's just walking in tiny little circles and doing push-ups and meditating and like doing whatever you need to stay awake, with no fire or anything either. Just, and it was within that, I decided to turn that also into a bit of a ceremony around the name change, of writing out all the things that I was letting go of, with letting go of my name, and burning that right before stepping into the circle, having that be a bit of a incubation period, and stepping out in the morning as James Bravelove.
So powerful. I love that. So powerful. And there's so much intention behind it all, which is not common. And it
wasn't just a, hey, getting high and thinking I'm going to change my name or something.
I'm like, I think of like Friends when Phoebe changes her name to Princess Consuela, and how quickly she was like, well, I just want to be Princess Consuela. That is a whole other conversation. But, there's so much intentionality behind this process that you've done. And I just thought it was really beautiful to highlight that, in our conversation, and just like, there's been a lot of involvement in your life. And so I'm excited to now see like what the next 12 months is going to unfold under, this new name, and the new power that you're stepping into, with that. So I have one last question for you.
Shoot.
Because you're on the Freedom CEO podcast. So when you think of being the CEO of your life, the chief decision maker over your life, how has owning your decisions brought you freedom?
That's a great question. And I see that as the fundamental step to creating freedom in your life, really, is actually claiming responsibility. That's literally the first step of my program when I bring guys in and work with them. Like, it's your fault. Everything in your life is your fault. You need to take not need to, but if you want to grow, you have to take responsibility for everything in your life. Not blame other people, not blame your wife, the world, the economy, all the things. And like, taking that responsibility over your decisions is how you can affect change on things. Anytime you're blaming anyone else, you give your power away. So that's, I very strongly believe in that. and as you can tell, and for me, that's how, we live in Costa Rica. Our whole life was not that long ago, just pictures on a vision board, like we created this whole reality that we live in. And I believe that anyone can do that if you're willing to take responsibility for making it happen and do the work, do the inner work, the outer work, all of it to move through everything you need to do and to take enough action and have like there's so many layers to it, but it starts with just taking responsibility and being willing to chase your dreams. So.
I love that. Perfect way to end. Like, so good. I'm so grateful for you and just the time to chat with you today. Thank you. I'm sure you're going to be back at some point. We'll have to do a check-in maybe later on this year, see what James Bravelove is up to.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah, it would be great.
See how it all evolves.
Yeah, exactly. So thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for tuning into the Freedom CEO podcast. If you got value out of today's show, I would love for you to leave a review, as it will help my show reach other people as well. You know what to do. Download this episode, click the like and subscribe button. If you feel like spreading more love, hop over to Instagram and share today's show in your stories. Remember to tag Shane Vidiata and the Freedom CEO. My DMs are always open, so drop me a line. I'd love to connect. Until next time, keep owning your decisions to live a life of freedom. Live a life you love.